The name of this segment is called What's the Matter? So as you can see, this image is made up of a bunch of dots, and I arranged them that way to sort of make a point. The first thing that I'd like to talk about is subatomic particles, and those are the particles that make up everything that we see. So tables, chairs, tea kettles, trees. So everything that we can sort of see is made up of these subatomic particles, very small. And so if you were to make another analogy, a lot of what we deal with on all of our screen technology are pixels. And depending on how dense the pixels are, that determines the resolution. So super high resolution on a big HD TV, you can't really see the pixels at all. And so the image looks super clear because all of the units that make up the pixels are, you can't see them anymore. It's sort of in a certain sense, it's like the subatomic level. If we had subatomic vision, that would be pretty wild. But we're not given that equipment. We can only see on the level that we can see. And subatomic is way too fine for us to notice as far as how we see the objects in our lives. So to go a little further, there's an artist, Chuck Close, who uses this technique in all these creative ways. He basically bases all of his paintings on photographs, and then he uses different units of value to make up the image. So some of his paintings, like if you look closely at them, some of his paintings are super abstract close up. Even within the squares themselves, they're just these little abstract paintings. And then you pull way back and it's almost like a photographic level image of a person or a portrait. He mostly does portraits. So the reason why I'm talking about that is the way that image relates to story. So I think that when you're on the surface of things, when you're too close to something, when you're too inside of something, you can't see what that is. You can't, if you're too close to one of these low resolution paintings or images that I've been talking about, you have to pull back in order to be able to discern what the object itself is. And so in the same sense, I think that civilization is at that point. So it's kind of a pixelated version of a cognitive space that's made up of all these points that are put together and that have been drawn up across human time into a super complex globe of electric in a way. So technology and economies and politics and cultures and territories and tribes and nations and states and so forth, all of that complexity has come from, this image making, this story making from the past, and now we are deeply embedded in that surface level of idea. And I don't think that I don't personally think that we can objectively see it anymore. It's just sort of like there are people that talk about kind of pulling off the surface of the planet, and I think that this type of thinking is at the vanguard. It has been talked about in the past, and the astronauts kind of had a realization, seeing the planet from outer space. So in many ways, the further away we get from the surface of things, the clearer we can see where we are. And so from that standpoint, for me, it kind of begs the question of why we are suffering under the current structure as it exists now. Like, we don't necessarily have to suffer under it. And I'm not saying it's all suffering. There are some beautiful things that we create, cultures and art and music and just amazing things that are going on all the time. But horrific things are going on all the time. It's kind of this chaos. And so I'm just wondering whether things can go to the level of human identity. If we can pull further away from the story slash image in order to create this sense of moving beyond history in a way. So sort of it's the end of history, not in the apocalyptic sense, but in the sense of having moved beyond the strictures that history represents as far as our behavior going forward. So I think that these ideas are useful in the sense that once you've kind of seen things at this level, or once you've had a discussion about looking at things from a little farther away, trying to get more toward what might be termed human identity. What does that mean? And maybe that means being liberated from the past in such a way that there could be a more openness to seeing the whole situation as a unified field. That does not mean that we don't have our own styles, our own cultures, our own clothes, our own languages, but then there has to be this countervailing force. There has to be this, I believe there has to be a countervailing sort of argument or presentation that has to do with moving beyond that approach to identity, a more universal identity that simultaneously embraces whatever particular culture or whatever particular belief systems that you may hold. It's just right now that the politics of the moment tend to exacerbate the divisive quality of all the groups and all the different points of view, and it tends to calcify those points of view, and it tends to just create this really toxic environment. So I think that if we can see that really these things are just suggestions, these things are just assumptions, and they're stories that we're just immersed in and unable to see objectively anymore, that there might be opportunity to see that, and in that way, when you see something or you understand something fully, you sort of can't go back to your previous understanding of it. It's hard to kind of go back and ignore what you've understood. And so in that sense, I think that these kinds of ideas might be useful. So there you have it. That's it for now. Let me know if it makes any sense to you at all. If it doesn't, if you've got things to add, subtract, whatever, I'd love to know what you think. Anyway, so thanks.